And we're live again. All right, give me 1 second. I'm just gonna make sure that it is good, and I think we're on the right stream. Okay, yeah. Sorry for the hang up, guys. Um, I did a lot to my computer, but hey, we're live now. Okay, that this was an awkward intro, but hey, we got theologian back on.
Good to be back, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. So we're gonna jump right into the topic. So I'm gonna share the exact post. I took a screenshot so people could see what exactly we're talking about.
Oh, you're gonna share a screenshot. You got that kind of technology now.
Yeah, yeah. I figured out.
Nice.
My last guest did it. I didn't even know he could do it.
Yeah,
And
I saw that he was sharing like a whiteboard.
yeah, and I was like, oh, that's that's neat. So, all right. So this was the post. And so right here we have this is a quote from the Declaration of Independence,
Hmm.
right? So we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All right, and then he says, "In the name of the most holy and undivided Trinity." Where was this quote from?
That's from the Treaty of Paris.
Oh, okay.
It should say it underneath it.
Oh,
It's
okay. The Treaty of Paris. That's what ended
the
the
end of the American
revolution.
Revolution.
Okay.
Yeah, Declaration of Independence starts it. Treaty of
Hmm.
Paris ends it.
So, and it says, from start to finish, the United States would not have come about but through a deep, pervasive biblical worldview. No religion except Christianity could have provided such statements, and as such, we should stand today grateful to God. Now, I guess no, this is pretty presuppositionalist right here, and of course, I wouldn't expect anything different. But I guess why do you think that no other worldview could produce a system where well, let me be specific. What is it about the American system or about this quote that you think requires a biblical worldview?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the things you can look at is other civilizations, right, and see
Hmm.
what has happened within what we might call the Christian West and the particular American experiment as compared to other societies, other civilizations from other frameworks, and see the rapid rise, the rapid uh, improvement, if you will, and then on the back end, global influence of America as a people, as a nation, and as an attractor of those of other people to the American ideals. And
You don't think a deist could
um,
could think
I,
this? I mean, because
I,
the guy who
I
wrote it
don't.
was.
Yeah, but when you say deist, right,
Hmm.
you have to remember that on the continuum of, say, atheism to Christianity, a deist of that day was almost indistinguishable from a Christian. Now, granted, Thomas Jefferson didn't go to church. He was
Hmm.
certainly, you know, um, had his sexual proclivities that we won't
Right.
get into.
Yeah.
So
He
certainly
even
his lifestyle.
he even had his own version of the Bible. My understanding, he took all the miracles out of it.
Something like that, actually. Yeah, I was able to find a replica of the actual Jefferson
Hmm.
Bible at a
Okay.
thrift store for like $5.
Oh.
Highly recommended. Because what he does, it goes through the four Gospels, and it's a a generalization, but I don't think it's unfair to say he basically cut out all the miracles.
Hmm.
But it is neat to see that he's got an English translation lined up with the Latin translation,
Hmm.
the Greek, and then something else. I forget which. I'm not going to go looking through it now. But I, I say all that to say there's a reverence for the person of Christ and the work of Christ, even in the context of somebody who we might classify as an unbeliever, but because of his theological views, for lack of a better way to say it. But I would say even Thomas Jefferson, as he's writing the Declaration of Independence, recognizes that this idea of rights
Hmm.
is not simply given by governments, that they are uh, given to us by God, by our Creator, has endowed us with unalienable rights. And as you see the nation of America develop into the Constitution, um, the governments are erected to protect and preserve those rights, if you will,
I
not to
agree.
establish them.
So now, aside from the creator part, but the unalienable rights, why couldn't a non-Christian think that a person has those?
Well, I would point to what is the foundation of those rights, right? So
Hmm.
now,
Well, they could just point to the humanity.
I mean, what do you mean by humanity?
Like they could say, like, so since they're a human, they inherently have them.
Well, that doesn't answer the question of what do you mean by human.
Hmm.
That just reformulates the claim that because they're human, they therefore have these rights. I would say, for example, a
Hmm.
unique aspect of Christian theism
Hmm.
that was present during the founding age is the fact that humans are made in the imago Dei, right? That we are made in the image of God, that we are
All right.
reflective of Him, and as such have a value that is unique to all other life forms of creation, right? And I know you probably would disagree with that to a degree, but at least we can both recognize that the creation days in Genesis, there was one day that man was created, and it was the last. Um,
Hmm.
Christianity would see, some poetic build up to that, right? Like humankind is sort of the crowning achievement of creation, the last
Hmm.
part of creation before God rests on the seventh day, that sort of thing. But there's an example of Christianity being uniquely able to point to a justification for human rights that's not of human invention or human convention, if you will.
Well, okay, so let's say I believe that humans have their inalienable rights just
Hmm.
because they're human, and I'll say that it's intrinsic to being human. I don't
Okay.
believe that. I think that there's some philosophical problems with that. But let's say I said that, and then you say you believe they have the rights because God gave them to them. You seem to be on equal footing
It's
here. Well,
it's not
what?
merely because God gave them to him. It's because of the nature of humanity, right? So it's not um, purely, and that's where I think some of the language of the Declaration isn't as precise as I would
Hmm.
like as a Christian. But I'm not critiquing that at this point. But for somebody to say, just it's a brute fact of reality that human have these rights, I would
But you're
point.
saying,
I
aren't
would
you
ask for
saying
a
something
justification.
similar? Aren't you saying something similar that it's a brute fact based in the fact that it's an imago Dei? So like, because of the imago Dei, you have these rights. That itself is a brute fact, wouldn't it?
Well, we would agree that it's a brute fact. The
Hmm.
difference is I have a justification beyond myself for stating it, whereas in this illustration, this hypothetical, you don't. You're just saying it is what it is without any explanation. And I think uh,
Well,
just as the founders would have argued that there needs to be a justification because they were in the existential struggle of whether or not their rights are granted to them by the king, who some argued in those days the divine right of kings, which I think we both would agree
hmm.
is not the right way to go about it, um, uh, for lack of a better way to phrase it. But
What is the
but
justification for thinking the imago Dei grants rights?
For example, the command that goes to Moses basically
Hmm.
against murder, that's uh, connected directly to the image of God, right? So you, we are not, we don't have the authority to
Mhm.
snuff out the image of God in another human being. That would be murder. Um, so that's the life aspect, if you will. There's a freedom that I would argue is inherent in the course of the biblical story,
Mhm.
the liberation of humanity from the slavery of sin. We see it more metaphorical in the Exodus story of the Israelites being brought out of Egypt. We see it, over the course of Israel's history, going into and out of
Okay.
captivity, and ultimately in the ministry of Christ and the apostles.
Let
That
me break
there's
down. Let me break down the issue that I'm seeing here. So
okay.
value. First, what do you think
hmm
value to you? What is value?
Um, I mean, it's a product of one's religion, for lack of a better way to say it. I mean, I don't.
I'd say
If you're
it's a
talking about the
product of
value of
one.
humanity,
Yeah. So to say that a value
hmm
is something that's important to you. It's something that matters to you. It matters to some mind. Like
uh,
there's no
I wouldn't
objective
say it
value.
just matters to me.
Well,
I would say that it matters
yeah,
to the creator, and therefore it should matter to me, and it should matter to you.
it matters
Whether
to a
whether
mind.
okay, if you wanted to phrase it like that, I
Yeah. So
wouldn't.
like I mean, the creator has a mind. What I'm saying, like it, but the value is based in a mind,
Okay.
right? Now, so you said so the creator values humanity, therefore humanity has value, right?
I think that'd be an oversimplification, but sure, we'll go
Okay.
with that.
Well, I don't see why couldn't humanity value itself, and therein now it has value because value is subjective. It's about what's important to a mind. There isn't some objective value.
Yeah, and you're using the objective as in mind independent, whereas subjective is mind dependent, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, in that framework, you could say that,
Hmm.
except that humanity has shown over and over and over again throughout history, all time, civilizations, that there is not a blanket across the board value for human life.
Well,
There are
it gets it
people,
it
there
gets
are
it
groups of
wrong.
people who are dehumanized that are
Hmm.
seen as less than people, even today in our society.
I think you see that in the Bible, though.
I would not disagree that you see that. I would argue that it's not prescribed that way. That when you see
Okay.
uh, ill
I
treatment, like when Moses murders the Egyptian and goes out into the wilderness,
mhm.
that's not therefore an endorsement of his killing of the Egyptian.
How about when Saul lost his anointing because he didn't go through go through perfectly with the genocide that God told him to do?
Well, I mean, I think the issue there is disobedience to God.
Oh yeah, I mean everybody's disobedient to God.
Right, but I mean
Right, but
that's what's at issue is God commanded
but they're
Saul to
not
do
on equal
something.
footing. So there are some people
What do you mean they're not
who
on equal footing?
they're not on equal footing as in their value, at least their treatment. Like there are
That's
some
not true.
okay, well there's a group of people
hmm
who God's told Saul to eliminate
Yeah,
the
why did he do
entire.
that?
Well, I have to go back and look at this. I think it has something to do maybe with the way they were treated when they came out the Promised Land. Israel was treated when they came out the Promised Land. I'm not sure.
So you have Israel being used as an instrument of judgment
Mhm.
against a people that showed ill treatment towards
the
their neighbor.
problem the problem is like judgments against people groups are problematic. Judgment should, if we're talking about all men are created equal and have these
hmm
unalienable rights, then
Sure.
judgment should apply to individuals. Like you can't punish an entire group of people.
I would disagree with that in principle, but I mean, if you wanted to
Okay, so
maintain that view, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, you would reject the biblical corpus as
okay,
a whole, right?
so how
So,
about for the slave trade? Could we punish all Portuguese?
um,
Just all of them?
so if you're asking me if we as people now
would it be
made the
moral?
decision, it would not be moral. See, it's different. It's a category difference when it comes from an individual human to commit a genocide, for example, as opposed to God instructing someone to execute judgment on a people for his own purposes.
Okay, but
that in and of itself, though, I would also argue, does not undermine the value of anybody involved in this equation because they were made in the image of God.
But you certainly don't have these unalienable rights. Like, they're definitely alienable, and it doesn't necessarily have any impact on what you do. It can be based on who you are.
Well, I mean, you're also bringing out an example of God specifically ordering somebody to do something for a specific reason at a particular period in time, and trying to use that to undermine the idea that general equity of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in 18th century American colonies. I know, but I mean, like, when you try to cherry pick that example out and try to use it to undermine what the Bible would prescribe believers, especially after the resurrection and after the New Testament and apostolic age, I think you're doing a disservice to reading comprehension and literature.
How about for any of the Canaanites when God told them to wipe them out? God said to wipe them out.
All of them. I mean, all of them were marked for destruction.
But that's not cherry picking here. Like we right here. This is an example of how unalienable rights can actually be applied. But then we don't see that.
Well, no, because we're not in a position, nor were the founders in the position of getting direct revelation from God in that same way for those same purposes. Right? That's where I think you're misunderstanding and misapplying the biblical text there. And
so God
it doesn't undermine the Imago Dei or the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Or property, as John Locke said.
God grants the unalienable rights, but he can violate them or circumvent them in some way.
Oh, yeah, he can execute judgment on any of us at any point in time.
Okay.
That's something that is seen also regularly. It's not the case that humanity has been endowed with this gift to execute divine judgment however they see fit, apart from God's ordination. So when you have, say, 18th century, say the French Revolution, for example, so certainly not anywhere close to theistically motivated as the American founding, you see lots and lots of bloodshed. The reign of terror, and all through that, you have individuals who are determining among themselves to execute judgment as though they had the authority to do so.
Right, and I would say those were bad, and they were violating their rights. But now for God, you're saying he wasn't violating their rights. You're saying
that's correct.
He was able to do that.
Yeah, because they had committed sin to God first and foremost. Well, but particularly the Amalekites, the Canaanites, but
particularly everyone is a sinner. So what I'm saying is, but there's not equal treatment even among the sinners. So you have this earth with a bunch of people on it. Everybody's sinful, and then there's some God is wiping out, and some He's not. And his basis for wiping out some and not wiping out others is because of who they are.
No, it's not because of who they are.
That's exactly the reason, right? Because
that's the thing.
The group that Saul was told to completely genocide, right? To eliminate, right? Obviously, those individuals did not mistreat Israel when they came out of Egypt. Like it's not like these people weren't alive at the time. Right, this was like several hundred years later. This is just
Yeah.
another group of people. That's why I asked, like, would it be okay to punish all Portuguese right now for the transatlantic slave trade? Like, that would be absurd because those individuals weren't responsible.
Well, I think that's something that you're not either seeing or not applying in the text is the nature of federal headship. And when we're talking about governments, there's a responsibility that government leaders have over their people. And when you have a tribe of folks, the Amalekites in this example, we're talking centuries of what may be called unprovoked aggression toward the Israelites. And sure, there are individuals within that society of Amalekites that were not directly involved in that.
Yeah, none of
That
them were. I
that
would
that
say.
that doesn't necessarily stand that they do not bear part of the guilt with that,
Why
and
would
how
they?
that works out.
Do Portuguese now bear part of the guilt for the slave trade? I mean, do any like white Americans who have family that was here during the 1800s, are they responsible for the thing? I mean,
I think
you
you
can
should
look
have
at my
Ibram X. Kendi
history.
on because he would certainly say yes.
Okay. Okay,
No, I think honestly though,
the
there's a covenant identity that is recognized, and so I'm not putting this forward as prescriptive,
okay.
but something that we see in the Old Testament for specifically the Israelites, for example, is uh, there is the Ten Commandments that were presented, and the generation that were led out of Egypt basically all died in the wilderness because of disobedience before they got to the Promised Land. And when they are getting into the Promised Land, one of the last thing that Moses instructs them in Deuteronomy, I want to say 26, 29, something like that. Or actually, no, even before that. In Deuteronomy 6, you have Moses instructing the people, "Hear, O Israel, hear the Lord our God is one," that the Shema. In that, you have later admonition to the people to identify with those who were in bondage and those who were the language is there, but that we were treated harshly, and God brought us out of Egypt. And then you see that repeated in one of the ceremonies for atonement. I believe it's atonement. Later on in Deuteronomy 26:29, that's to be repeated throughout the generations. So this idea of covenant identity spanning back into generations and centuries within a group of people isn't unheard of. And in fact, we see that even now, that there's a desire to want to connect to one's heritage, right? We see that with individuals from any walk of life, let alone this tendency to identify, for example, as an African American or a Chinese American or an Irish American. There's a desire that even though you're here and this is a distinct country from where your heritage flows from, to identify with that is still to identify with history. Now, all that to say, I wouldn't say that necessarily
I
confers any guilt.
that's the problem because
Yeah,
like I think you can look at anybody's past and then you can go back far enough in their ancestry and you'll find somebody doing something extremely evil to someone else. But like I don't
yeah.
inherit any of that guilt. So because do you think that group punishment, like, or identity based punishment, do you think that is aligned with the ideas of having unalienable rights?
As a general rule in our day, yeah, I would say those two are in conflict. But what we're dealing with in this time period that you're referring to
Hmm.
is wholly different than what we're dealing with now. And I would point to, if nothing else, the divine command specifically to execute judgment on these people that we don't have now. We didn't have at the founding era of this nation, and we haven't had since then, despite what the charismatics would say.
Okay. Well, what about okay? So, did equality apply to women?
The equality of value, yes.
Okay. Well, what about like, equality before the law?
Um, well, I think it depends on which civil structure you're dealing with, right?
Do,
Certainly,
do
the
you,
civil structure of Israelites, it was different. But for example, one of the criticisms that is often drawn of Old Testament um, family arrangements is men having multiple wives. Well, with the number of armed conflicts that you have, you're going to have a lot of husbands dying. And so part of polygamy as a practice, not all of it, but part of it was actually for the security and preservation of those women, so that they wouldn't be left homeless, destitute out there. That there's a responsibility that the man took on to care for them. So there was if you will, a recognition of their value in that regard. And I think we see that echoed even in the New Testament, where societally women were not viewed as, for example, being reputable in a
I'm
court
not
of
even talking
law.
about society here. So right.
No,
So.
I get that, but talking about God's economy versus what we might see
Mhm.
in a descriptive historical analysis is, for example, it's the women who first announced the resurrection of Christ. It's many women along the way in Jesus' ministry, like the Samaritan woman at the well, like the woman who was healed from
Right.
bleeding, that become mouthpieces affirming the arrival of the Messiah. So you see, and that doesn't even begin to get into the apostolic letters
So
that affirm the value of women and the necessity of women, or even in the Old Testament, wisdom herself is personified in the feminine. So I think there's a lot to be said about how God's people have viewed women, and specifically the value that God has towards women, specifically equal to men in that regard.
So I want to focus on like the bottom paragraph here. You said from start to finish, the United States would not have come about, but through a deep, pervasive biblical worldview. So like
Yep.
a fundamental part of the United States is in its judicial system is equality before the law.
Hmm.
Okay, now you look at the legal system that God had set up for Israel. There was not an equality before the law. Like
Mm,
so,
okay.
I could give you distinctions. Like for instance, the like a man could sell his daughter into slavery. He couldn't sell his son.
Hmm.
And if he's Hebrew, he's free after 6 years. The daughter isn't. If the man suspected his wife of cheating, he could take her to the temple, make her drink the substance, and is going to sterilize her or make her barren
It's not going to sterilize her.
or make
It's
her barren.
going to judge adultery. That's a conversation we had with Facade
Right.
probably last year sometime.
Was going
That
to
that's
make her
it's
barren.
not. But if there was no unfaithfulness, if there was no adultery, it says right there in the text that no harm will come to her.
Right.
So
Exactly.
it's so we're not talking about
No, no,
sterilizing women.
let me finish it. Let me finish it.
Okay.
It would sterilize her if she had committed adultery. But the issue is, well, I mean,
Hmm.
that's just one issue. Even
So
if you
it's a
did commit
judgment.
adultery, okay, sure, okay, but it doesn't apply the other way around. If the wife thinks the husband is cheating, she can't make him go to the temple and then his balls fall off or something like that,
Right.
right? Like there's so we're talking about equality before the law, like regardless of whether it's judgment for adultery. What I'm saying is it's not equal.
Well, it may appear unequal to our 21st century perspectives looking at it, but I mean, for one thing, you're talking about a pre-scientific age, right? If they had the scientific knowledge and technology that we have, you could just do a blood test.
Okay,
Right? That'd be totally different.
but
But when it
you
comes
don't
to,
need 21st century science. They have a God who
mhm,
knows everything.
right,
But what I'm saying, why couldn't he give them a system that treated people equally?
I'm not saying he
'Cause-
couldn't.
well, but he didn't. So
He
that is,
didn't.
yeah,
Agreed.
you don't see. So what I'm saying, if you look throughout Mosaic law,
Mhm.
there's vast inequalities based on who you are, based on your genitals, and also based on your heritage, whether you're Hebrew or not. like non-Hebrew slaves, they were slaves for life, versus being free for 6 years if you were Hebrew.
Mhm.
Like that's not equal.
If you want to contend that's fine, but none of that has anything to do with the post or the connection I was drawing between the founders and Christian theology. For
Okay.
example, right nowadays
All right.
you have a large number. I say a large. You have a subset of the population that wants to tear down the statues of, say, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and the like because they held slaves. And part of the argument goes, this isn't the totality, so don't at me in the comments, is we should not venerate slaveholders, which certainly, except them being slaveholders is not why they were venerated. So I think that the parallel here is none of the founders were looking at this law and saying, you know what, this is the law we need to model our society after, right? It's not that these
Not.
particulars, right?
I mean,
And
I could say that the reason we venerated Bill Cosby was not because he was,
a serial
assaulting.
rapist,
Yeah, we venerated him because he was funny.
right?
That doesn't mean we could put up, statues of Bill Cosby
And
everywhere.
I'm not advocating for
Okay.
statues. Cards on the table. I don't like statues of individuals, period, living or dead. Certainly not living, though. Um, all that to say, the reason why Christianity had such an impact on the founding fathers
Hmm.
wasn't because of this law. Wasn't because the woman had to drink the dirt water mixture
Right.
and not the man. That's not the arguments they were making. They
Hmm.
were drawing more broad connections, and like we said at the top, even Thomas Jefferson himself, taking away the miracle, still saw Jesus as someone to um, behold and look up to, if you will.
Okay.
And so that's my point is you going to these sundry laws here and using them as a wedge to draw between the founders and Christianity doesn't work because that's not
No, no,
the
no, no.
platform they were arguing for.
I'm not drawing a wedge between the founders and Christianity. I'm drawing a wedge between the United States and Christianity. Like the system,
Okay.
the
I
the
mean,
the,
six of
system,
one.
the system. Well, no, the founders of the United States aren't the same thing. The founders were majority Christians. The United States system is not, and it is not based on Christianity. Matter of fact, there are vast contradictions between them. Like even the Bill of Rights, the first one is a complete contradiction of the first four commandments. You have no other gods before me. First Amendment, you can have any god you want. Don't make for yourself a graven image. Make a graven image if you want. Keep the Sabbath holy if you want to, or not. Keep it unholy. Like there's just huge
It's,
contradictions.
I would
Even
push
in
back that that's a contradiction, though, because when you see the way Christian Christianity has viewed those laws, right? Just the
Mhm.
Ten Commandments. On one hand, it's a matter of natural law. On the other hand, there's a question of authority. Whose obligation is it to enforce those laws, if you will?
well,
And
so
and in Christian history, those first four laws, that the first table of the law, is under the authority of the church, not the magistrate, right? So the magistrate can punish you for murder, can punish you for adultery, can punish you for theft, right? The second table of the law belongs to the magistrate. So it's not a contradiction to the
that's not a
Constitution.
distinction that
It's
you see in the Bible. They was killing people for idolatry.
well,
They would kill a false prophet. They would kill people for religious reasons. And
in the Old Testament, sure, because there was a different civilization set up. It was a
right,
different framework.
because
It was,
but
I
it
would
was
argue,
getting its
much more
authority
of a
from God.
theocracy.
It was
Yeah,
getting its authority.
because
But
there was
so
direct revelation
and
from there.
no, but it's not. No, that's not why. If you look at Romans 13, all governments get their authority from God. So the
Hmm.
authority that we saw in the Old Testament shouldn't be any different from any
Oh, sure it should.
government. Well, why would it? 'Cause if they're both getting it, if all government gets its authority from God, then its authority should not alter. It shouldn't change. It
Well,
wouldn't make any sense to say that the governments now have less authority than the one in the Old Testament, because it both come from God.
well, see, what you had in the Old Testament is a collapsing of those spheres. The church and the magistrate were effectively the same, right? They were different tribes of the same people. Right?
Where
You
do
had
you
the
see a
Levite
separate?
priests.
Where do you see a separation between like civil and religious laws in the Bible? Like where do you see that? Like I see punishments, like judicial punishments, applying for religious reasons in the Bible.
Do you see that in the New Testament? I'm just curious.
No,
Okay.
because the New Testament isn't written like that. So there aren't, like, in the Old Testament you have laws that are
Hmm.
laid out. The New
Right.
Testament is a different format. Like in like the
So
Gospels, it's like it's almost historical telling
two,
stories, and then
two,
there's
two
instructions to a
examples come to mind.
church.
Yeah, two examples come to mind. There's a well-known woman caught in adultery, right? Where Jesus does some writing in the dirt, says, "He who without sin cast the first stone," and everybody walks away, right? That's showing that just because there was an adultery, among other things, just because there was adultery practice, didn't necessitate the death penalty. It also showed that the individuals who were wanting to execute that judgment on her should not have. And then in 1 Corinthians 5, I think it is 5 or 6, there is discussion. Paul is referring to a man in the congregation that is sleeping with his stepmom, basically.
Mhm.
His father's wife. He's taken her, and he is welcomed into fellowship. Now, that's blatant adultery. Paul does not say, stone this man,
Well,
stone this woman.
but Paul is giving instructions to the church in that instance,
Precisely,
not to a
precisely.
government.
And his affirmation to them
Mhm.
is effectively to excommunicate them. And the wording he uses draws back from the Old Testament law, purge the evil from your midst. So there's a purity that's expected of the church there, but that judicial law is not the church's to mete out. So
Okay, but
there's a couple of examples there. And
right,
so I
but
would
the
say,
instructions to
mhm,
government, if we see
mhm.
how the way a government could handle adultery, they could kill the person in the Bible, and there is no, and there
When you
is
say in the Bible, can you be more specific?
wait, yeah, I'm talking about like in Mosaic law, the way adultery
Sure.
is treated.
Again, because you have the spheres of the church and the magistrate collapsed in one society.
Right. So and
You
then
don't see that in the New Testament, for example. You see the church very distinct from the magistrate. The magistrate put to death the Messiah. Even another church group, right, the Jews, participated in that. There is a definite
so
distinction between the church and the state there.
so and the Bible isn't separating the church from the state. In this instance, times are different. The Christian
I
church
would agree.
don't have their own government, right? So
Hmm.
so the instructions that God gave to government aren't going to apply to the church. So they couldn't kill somebody for adultery. It would just be a murder. They
Hmm.
just don't have the authority to do that. But if we look at our last instructions on how the government could treat adultery,
You
was
say our. I don't think that applies to you yet, unless
well,
you've
yeah,
repented.
right, no,
If you have, welcome
yeah.
home, brother.
Well, okay, I would say the instructions apply to everyone, right? Whether you're
Mm-mm.
elected. Okay, okay,
The instructions don't apply to everybody.
okay.
You're talking about instructions to the
Sure,
government, right?
sure. All right, now, okay. So what I'm saying is, so like, this distinction between like civil and religious law
Hmm.
is something that you see later in Enlightenment thought, but not in the Bible. I don't see that.
I think you do, because even in Romans 13,
Hmm.
right? Remember that what's happening during this age is not widespread acceptance of Christianity. I
Right.
mean, Paul, before he writes his letters, he's going around killing Christians, right? So, and the Romans aren't exactly upset with this, because part of the reason Jesus was put to death from a Roman perspective was that he was fomenting a rebellion. So killing the people who claimed to be following in his stead were putting down rebellions before they start, right? So there was not widespread acceptance of this. And so when you see Paul writing to the church, he's to the church at Rome. Number one, he's writing to the church at Rome. He's not writing to the magistrate at Rome.
But that's precisely my point. Because
And so that's the distinction there. He's not writing to them. He's acknowledging to the church that the government wields the sword, and doing so in a time when that sword was being wielded unjustly. And so you see this distinction that's implicit in what he's writing. Not only then, but later in Peter's letters, he's writing to people who have been dispersed. Right,
so right
Rome
now,
has sacked them and spread these people out all over. But I want to say Mesopotamia, Greece, but that general area. I'm getting my geography mixed up. But the point is, you don't see the authors of these books addressing the magistrate, just like you didn't see Jesus addressing the magistrate with any forcefulness. I mean, when he's talking to Pilate, he's telling him directly, my kingdom is not of this world, right? You do what you do.
Okay, so all right.
So all of this is baked into the cake is what I'm saying. It's not going to come out and say specifically church here, state here. That's not the way that the Bible was written, no matter how much we might like it to be. But that distinction is made.
You said so there's a distinction between the type of laws that the government should be able to make and the type of laws that a church should make.
I'm saying that the First Amendment to the Constitution is not in conflict with the Ten Commandments, precisely because of this Christian understanding of the Old Testament. I think a Jew might be a more effective or a more accurate opponent to lay this view on, because Judaism would identify with these Old Covenant practices without the lens of the New Testament and Christ's ministry to contextualize them.
Okay, when a man was picking up sticks on the Sabbath,
yep,
and Moses found him, like, hey, say, what should we do with him? God said, kill him. Do you think that would be a violation of his First Amendment right?
Now?
Yeah.
I would.
So then they are in conflict, because the law requires different things.
But the law doesn't mandate that there has to be the death penalty for it, right? And that's part of, especially in Christian theology, this idea of grace and mercy, is you don't have to mete out the death penalty just because the offense says so. So that
$1 fine for picking up sticks on the Sabbath, would it be violating his First Amendment?
Depends on the circumstances.
I can tell you for a fact the answer is yes.
Okay.
If the government implemented any sort of punishment whatsoever, it didn't even have to be a punishment. It could just have a law to say this shouldn't be done. That would be completely inappropriate and in violation of the First Amendment.
And you can have that view. It's perfectly within your power to have that view.
So they are incompatible, because you're saying like
they're not incompatible. Your conclusion is going too far from what the evidence actually shows.
Okay,
they're not in conflict. They're not incompatible.
You were saying that it's not in conflict because the law doesn't require the death penalty. What I'm saying is the fact that the law could implement the death penalty at all, or any sort of penalty, means it is in conflict with the First Amendment. You could not punish anybody. The First Amendment prohibits punishing anybody for violating any sort of religious law, for doing anything on the Sabbath.
Okay.
So those are contradictions.
Well, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's about 3,000 years between the two.
Right. Yeah, I agree. But what I'm saying is, but it's not pulling from it. So like, I mean, this is like a foundational principle. How
No,
about this?
well, let me ask you this. Right? Would you deny that there was a Christian influence on the founding fathers?
Oh yeah, there was definitely a Christian influence on our founding fathers. I mean, but like
Okay.
not in
Even
good
with all
ways.
of these,
Not in good
it,
ways.
you don't think there's any good influence that Christianity had on the founding fathers?
Uh, there's no, not in a way that they influenced the United States. Matter of fact, I would say the United States came about as a result of immigrants and refugees fleeing actual Christian nations. They
Mm.
were leaving. Yes, the British Empire, that was a actual Christian nation where they were punishing people for following the wrong religion, following the wrong types of stuff, blasphemy. You could be killed for it. They were fleeing an actual Christian nation, came here and created something that was neutral to Christianity.
Okay,
It
so
was
what in the New Testament do you see connects um, that framework of government with
so
the New Testament,
it,
with Christianity?
the New Testament says nothing about how government should operate except for reaffirming God's authority over it. And what authority does he
God's
have?
authority, right?
Yeah, God's
Not
authority.
human authority.
Yes,
Okay.
that's all it does. So you're not going to see any. You're not going to see that in the New Testament, just because of the type of literature that it was. It was very different. Whereas if
Hmm.
you look at the actual laws that was describing how the government should operate, that's all in the Old Testament, and they're completely in contradiction to our American system. You even had opportunity for it. This was when I was working on my first master's degree, and I was my first master's was in public policy, and I remember reading the Bible. I was still a Christian at the time, and you're familiar with Israel's history. So they had three kings as a unified kingdom, right? They had
Yep.
Saul,
Saul,
David,
David,
Solomon,
Solomon.
right? And then Judah and Benjamin split from the 10 northern tribes,
Yep.
and Judah and Benjamin, we could just combine them and just call them Judah,
Hmm.
right? They would have good kings. They have a bad one every once in a while, but they're having good kings as well. Israel, if you look at their kings,
That'd be the
they're
Northern Kingdom for
yes,
the
northern
audience following
kingdom.
along.
Essentially all of their kings are bad. Like
Hmm.
King Ahab, if you're familiar with that guy, he's a really big bad one, right?
Yeah.
He was so evil, God sent the demon to kill him. Right now,
Take him out.
right. So that was Israel's king. They would have benefited from something like checks and balances. They would have benefited from separation of powers. Nowhere in there do you see this.
Well,
That was
nowhere in there should we expect to see it.
well, if we're saying that the Christianity or the Christian worldview influenced them to create the American system, you should see some semblance, because that is the separation of powers, and then the checks and separation of powers, as in you have a judicial, executive, and legislative branch, and then you have checks, whereas you give the judicial a few legislative powers, give the legislative branch a few executive powers, etc. Right? So that's the difference. So if we're going to say that Christianity had all of this influence on the American system, you should see imported principles like that somewhere in there. And I don't see it. Like, it's a complete rejection of it. And there was plenty of opportunity for it. And it's just completely non-existent.
I don't think I follow. I don't think what
So,
you're saying proves what it does.
well, okay, so what exactly would be the Christian influence on the American system?
I think one of the things that you see is an affirmation of human dignity. That we have those three rights, right? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, but because there's property or pursuit of happiness, we just put life and
Yeah.
liberty. There's life and then a degree of freedom
Right,
that we have.
but now that kind of go back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, how that wasn't consistently followed. And but there's one
Well,
exception.
just because it's not
God.
consistently, just because it's not consistently put forth, doesn't negate the principles. So, case in point, right? The system that God handed down to the Israelites through Moses, the entire history of Israel in the Old Testament shows a constant stream of disobedience.
Right.
Right? Maybe some disobedience, maybe some repentance, but
Sure.
then it's just over and over. So there's not this prolonged betterment of Israel because they're adhering to God's law and God's principles and the like,
Hmm.
right? So, so just because Israel, God's chosen people, who among all the peoples of the earth was given this,
Hmm.
failed to do it, doesn't negate the reality of the principles, doesn't negate the goodness of the foundation that they were given. Right? So I would say
So
just because, in the same way, a professed Christian goes out and bombs an abortion clinic, that's not a Christian deed just because a professed Christian goes out and does it.
no, no, no. I don't care about things that Israel was doing outside of God. Right now, I'm
Hmm.
talking about stuff where God commanded, and this isn't cherry picking. These aren't exceptions to the rule. What I'm saying, there are so many exceptions that seems to be the rule. You see inequality throughout.
Hmm.
I mean, and that's pretty much the entire premise. Like
Well, when you
God
say
has a people
inequality, what do you mean by that?
that people are being treated differently, not just
Yeah,
by God, but also by the government that He creates.
and that's what
So
literally all of the prophets are railing against is like the justice,
no, no, no,
not
no,
being
no,
a
no,
respecter of persons,
no, no.
not showing deference to the rich or the poor.
No, so what God is doing the opposite. He he treats people differently, not based on their actions, but based on who they are, and then He creates systems that
For
treats people differently as well.
it's not because
And
of who they are. I think
it is.
that's a constant bias that keeps being put in this conversation. Like
How
the
is it a
Amalekites and the
bias?
Canaanites that you put up,
Secret.
they weren't ordered to be killed because of who they were. It was what they had done, namely the crimes that they had committed, or the sins, probably a better way to say it, that they had committed against the Israelites for
No,
a
no, no.
prolonged period of time.
That's
It's
not
not
fair.
because they were Amalekites or because they were Canaanites.
You don't understand what I'm saying.
Judgment was tied to specific actions.
The Canaanite babies committed no
Hmm.
act of aggression towards any Israelite. But the Canaanite baby was still killed. He was killed because he belonged to a group that God said did a thing. That's what I'm saying.
Hmm.
So he's eliminating entire groups. Sometimes hundreds of years later, where the individual is responsible for whatever crime no longer even exists.
Yeah, but that
That's what
gets
I'm.
into the
That's what
principle
I'm
of
saying.
headship
So
that we
they're
talked
being
about
killed,
before.
but they're being killed for
Hmm.
who they are, not for anything they did.
No,
That is antithetical to the American system.
but that's not what's happening either. It's not specifically who they are. It's that sin that was
That
committed.
that they
That
didn't commit.
the severity of it was meted out on the entire population.
But they didn't commit. That's what I'm saying. But they didn't commit these were different people, and that's what the American system is built, or the American justice system is built on treating people as individuals. This
Right. There's a
that
sense
is not
of
the way
human
God was.
equality and dignity, and that is fundamentally a biblical, a Christian perspective on humanity.
What you mean, treating people as groups rather than individuals?
No, that human beings have dignity, and there's equality among them.
There's not equality.
You say that, but I mean, you
But
can't
you
pull
see
out
it in
special,
example.
cherry pick special instances
It's not.
and say that it eliminates the
It's
principle.
not special instances because you keep seeing it over and over again. If I pick one, if it was only one,
Hmm.
then you could say, oh, that's cherry picking. Maybe if it was only two, that's cherry picking. But I'm saying I can do this over and over again. I
But
can
the
show you.
principle
This is
against
it is
murder
it is pr- it,
is based on the Imago Dei, is based on the inherent worth and value and dignity of human beings,
I'm not talking
and
about.
that goes back. to the at least the Noahic covenant. So Genesis 9, right? And I would argue even further, because even without an explicit prohibition to not murder, Cain is punished for murdering his brother, right? So and that points to this concept of natural law, which the deists are fond of referencing in their writings of the time. You see references not to a Christian God, but to nature's God, to natural law, to providence, these Christian ideals and these Christian ideas that are divorced from the text. And I think it's probably.
I think this could break this down. So you have it's Saul's king of Israel. You have an Amalekite baby and an Israeli baby born on the same day. All right? One has to die and the other one doesn't. What did they do?
I don't know. I would ask you, what did they do?
They did nothing, right? They're just babies.
Okay.
The Amalekite baby is dying because he's an Amalekite. That is antithetical to the system, to the American system.
Hey, talking to your mic a little bit more. There's a comment in the chat that you weren't coming through very well.
Oh yeah, sorry guys, my internet sucks. What's going on is that I'm going to re-upload a high definition version of this in like a day or two.
Oh no, nobody wants a high definition version of this.
Yeah. But like for some reason, when it streams to YouTube, it gets choppy, and then I just download the MP4 and I upload it, and then it's smooth. I don't know what's going on, but I'll try to stay close to my mic. But what I'm saying is that the Amalekite baby is dying not because of anything he did, but because of who he is.
I think that's a stretch, given the circumstance.
But it's not a stretch.
Okay.
Because it's collective.
Because that's not the principle.
It's collective.
Right. It's like when Jesus walks on the water. That's not an acknowledgement that anybody can walk on the water. But then you could say, well, Peter got out there and walked with him, so everybody should be able to walk on water. Just because there are extenuating circumstances and unique circumstances, let's say it that way, that they don't establish the norm, right? There was a particular purpose for the people of Israel, and I'm not going to get too theological in with all of it, but these judgments that were meted out on other peoples in the area at the time do not reestablish the norms of the law fundamentally. So when we're talking about human equality, human dignity, you see throughout Scripture a running theme that God values humankind as a whole.
Okay, he can value them, but but the way they're treated is not the same.
Okay, well, let's say it this way. We're coming at this from completely different worldviews, so we're going to look at the same data and come to different conclusions. Fair?
To a certain extent, but if we're comparing some story in the Old Testament and seeing how that corresponds to the American system, we should be able to look at it whether you're Christian or not. You should be able to look at the collective punishment of the Amalekites and say, no, that is not aligned with the American justice system, with the United States system. You could just say that that would be a gross violation of due process for so many reasons. Like the worldview.
If you wanted to say that, you could. I think you're getting out over your skis on it, but
how could you not say it? Like, okay, tell me, do you think? Okay, would it be constitutional for collective punishments to be implemented now?
I would say we're talking about a different category of punishment for the reasons I've mentioned before. So to make it shorter, I was just saying no. Okay. I wouldn't go with it. That's why I think it's foolish to, for example, we talked about reparations a while back. I think it's foolish to punish right now anybody for slavery, for any, whether it's criminally, civilly, monetarily, whatever. I think that's foolish.
Yeah, well, so and if you recall, my argument for it was you don't punish people, you punish the United States.
Hmm.
So in that sense, the United States is being punished.
But the United States, as constituted now, is not the same one
It is.
that
It is.
allowed.
It is the same system.
See,
It's the
so
same government. It's the Constitution. It's the same
so
government.
take that. So the individuals in government are different now. So you're
No, 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 no.
effectively making the same argument for
No, I'm not.
punishing
But
the
that's the system.
Canaanites and the Amalekites
No, no,
because
no.
they're different individuals, but it's the same institution.
No, it's not. So no, no, no. So you could
So is it
punish.
not the same institution?
Yeah. So the United States could owe debt from. Let's say the United States had a loan from
Hmm.
France in the early 1800s. If that money isn't paid off, the United States still owe that money.
Hmm.
It doesn't go away because the individuals who are alive in the country died because
I'm right there with you.
the debt didn't belong to any particular individual. It belonged to the state.
Hmm.
So you can still hold the state responsible. Here's the huge difference. When we're talking about a punishment, death penalty, that doesn't apply. You can't apply a punishment that way to the in the American system. And I get it. You could say, okay,
Sure you can. You and you and Fasad both have advocated punishing the children of rapists through abortion. That's the death penalty for an innocent person.
no, it's not.
Sure it is.
No, that's not a
And that's not even a born child,
That's not, no,
right?
that's not a
That's a
punishment.
child that has not done
It's
anything.
just
You're
categorically
snuffing
wrong.
snuffing out an innocent human life.
No,
What
it's
has that human life
No.
done to deserve the death penalty?
So it doesn't deserve the death penalty. That's
Okay,
because
but that's
like,
what abortion does. Is it kills?
No,
the,
it's not.
the-
No, it's not. The woman could keep the baby if she wants to. So like if it was a penalty, then the baby would just be punished, boom, and that'd be it. So
and that's what
it's
happens.
categorically wrong. That's not how that works.
Okay.
But what we're saying
Go ahead.
here is okay, and I could just grant, and I could just give to you that okay, abortion is wrong. God was killing a bunch of babies.
Okay.
So, all right. So, was it okay for God to kill babies? Because if we're going to say that the American system is wrong, then wouldn't it also?
Who said the American system is wrong?
Well, if you think for some reason that in the American system babies are being punished when they're aborted.
No, I'm saying that it's advocated and permitted now that when you have a rapist conceive a child, that and the rape victim conceives the child, that it's not the rapist father who is put to death, but it's actually the child who's put to death through the process of abortion. Now,
Right.
there's no due process to it. That's another part of it that makes it unjust.
Do you think
That there's no due process. There's no human equality before the law in that sense.
you think babies are so right now you still think babies are punished when they're aborted? Oh, when-
Effectively, yeah.
Okay. All right. I don't want to go on an abortion thing. Like, but this
fine.
yeah. Okay. So now, what I was saying was, so if we're saying that that the founders were pulling from their Christian beliefs or pulling from the Bible when they were creating this American system, we should see the influence. And I look at it and I don't see it. And when you
Well, of course you don't.
when you try
You
to
got your blinders on.
no. But when you try to point out what the influences are, I can point out not just one exception, but their exceptions are so prevalent throughout the Bible that it seems to be the rule.
You said it seems to be, but you're using extenuating circumstances and using that to override the rule, which, as I pointed out earlier,
The rule,
that's in practice the same thing as saying we built statues to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson because they were slaveholders.
but collective
No.
punishment is allowed in the Bible. Yes. Or no?
Okay. It was meted out in the
Right.
Bible.
So
I wouldn't say it's
it was
permitted
allowed.
in the sense that it's instituted in law, because you don't see the law establishing kill all of those people. You see God ordering the Israelites specifically, those folks, but the ones that are inhabitants on the land that I'm giving to you. I'm giving you this land and using you to judge them. But all of that is categorically different. But
All right. All right. So here is collective punishments being instituted by the law. Right. We see with the Ammonites and the Moabites, they were explicitly barred from the assembly of the Lord.
okay, yeah, a lot of non-Jews were prohibited.
No. Okay, no. Not just non-Jews. Like you could convert. But if you were an Ammonite or a Moabite, you could not come in. That was based in the law. If
Okay,
you were of those ethnic groups, you could not come in. Period.
that's not the same thing as
It's the
killing
same.
them.
No. We weren't talking about killing. We were
Yeah, we were.
talking
You're
about
talking about the difference
no
between a law implementing, standardizing
negative. That's not
the
what I was talking about.
execution of groups.
That's not what I was talking about. I was talking about
That's
collective
the
punishment.
examples you were bringing out.
But yeah,
Collective punishments.
the issue is collective punishment, not necessarily just killing. The issue is collectively,
Okay.
like
Yeah.
because being killed for a crime isn't antithetical to the American system. I don't have an issue with that. Right?
Okay, but
The issue that we
what I'm
have is
saying. Okay.
collective punishment.
Okay.
But so the thing that you said that is not in the law, it is. We see that it's in Deuteronomy
That's
23.
that's not what I was saying. That's what I'm trying to
Okay.
explain to you is
You were saying
what.
that collective punishment is you were saying that when we saw collective punishment in the Bible, those were just special instances when God was commanding it, but we don't see that as like a rule
That's
in
not what I
in
was
the law.
saying. I
Okay.
was talking about the specific examples that you brought up
Hmm.
about the destruction or the annihilation of the Canaanites and the Amalekites.
Right.
That there was nothing in the law that instituted that as the norm to go out and kill those people. I'm not making a proclamation about what you're calling I forget the term you're using, collective
Collective
punishment.
punishment.
I'm not making any sort of thing. I'm talking about a specific punishment that you've brought up routinely over and over again in the course of this conversation.
What collective punishment is? So the issue is not killing. The issue
Okay.
is that the punishment is applied to a group based on who you are. So if you're a Moabite, you cannot join the assembly of the Lord. That's a law. Just period. Why? Because you're a Moabite. It has nothing to do with that individual's actions. It is treating people as a collection. It's treating people as groups. That is
Okay.
antithetical to it's not only just un-American. It's un-Western. Like you in Western.
I don't know if you know this, but the Bible is not a Western book.
Yeah, clearly, clearly, clearly. But okay, but what I'm okay. So if you look at Western systems, right,
Hmm.
in the United States specifically, you keep running. So where else do you see the Christian influence on the American system? Can you like
Yeah, I mentioned it before. The concept of natural light or natural rights, natural law. That the deists of the time were fond of referencing natural law, nature's God, without specifically Trinitarian
right?
references.
Do you think
Uh,
do you think collective collective punishments is in line with natural law?
um, the way you're framing it, I would I wouldn't have an opinion one way or another. But
If I
specific
said
to natural rights,
if
I would
I,
point to specifically that quotation where
if I said
Thomas
right now,
Jefferson, a deist, writes that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
mhm,
I would argue that no other philosophy, no other religion can provide that statement other than Christianity. Or if you wanted to expand it to
But I think Christianity.
Judaism and Islam, but neither of those had a demonstrative impact on the founders of the day. And in fact, Islam was on the other side of many conflicts with the Barbary pirates. But like, you can't get that from secularism. You don't get that from even a pure deism, because there's no way you can know, because there's no revelation that all men are created equal, that all men have, everybody has the right to life, everybody has liberty.
The revelation that they were getting was contrary. The revelation they were getting was collective punishment. The revelation they was getting was I'm putting all government power into one person. That is the
Who's this?
It's the Bible. So remember what I was talking about, like the way after the kingdom split and all of Israel's kings were evil.
Yeah.
I pointed that out because since they were all evil, there was ample opportunity to implement a system that could help negate that. Checks and balances, separation of powers is a good way to do that, and it didn't.
Yeah,
and it concentrated all power into an individual. That is the revelation they were getting.
The revelation that the founders were getting?
No. You were saying that the secularists couldn't come to the conclusion that we have unalienable rights like life, liberty, and property, or the pursuit of happiness, because they weren't getting direct revelation.
Not from
people who were getting revelation weren't getting those type of ideas. They weren't getting life, liberty. They were getting slavery. They was getting collective punishment. They was getting difference. Women and men are treated differently between the law.
I don't think you'll find that as you read through the writings, the correspondences of the framers, or of the founders of the country.
You won't get that from you won't see the founders because they weren't influenced by the Bible in this regard.
I think they were. Specifically, you mentioned limited government, separation of powers. Part of that, I will grant, experientially, like they're going to war with a king, right? So a monarchy. So there is part of it that's like, hey, maybe we just spread this out. But consistent with Christianity and an understanding of the depravity of man and a tendency toward tyranny when power and authority is consolidated, separating that out is perfectly consistent with that. And I would argue...
Where do you see separation of powers in the Bible?
It's not that you see separation of powers in the Bible, but you see the upstream, like the stone that goes in to the lake. The separation of powers is the ripple. The stone that starts it off is the depravity of man, right? The tendency to tyranny.
Right.
You can look in the Old Testament, right? The judges. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That's not good for a society.
So, are you saying that the framers were looking at the Bible for examples of what not to do and how they could actually make a good society?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I would take. I know this may surprise you. I would take the position that the founders were positively influenced by Christianity.
Okay. What principle? Like, is it the civil rights, due process, separation of powers, separation of church and state? Like, what
yeah, the separation of church and state is a big part of that.
Where do you see that in the Bible?
I feel like we had this conversation already, going through some of Jesus's interactions with the civil magistrate, the way Paul wrote of the civil magistrate to the church, the way the church is seen as distinct from the civil magistrate.
But in those instances, that's not Paul or God saying that they ought to be separate. He's just dealing with them because there's a Christian church and there is a government, and they're already separate. And so he is dealing with them as they are. That's not saying that they ought to be separate. He's not endorsing some sort of principle. of separation of religious power and secular power. That's not what's going on here.
Okay.
Well, so I get so then you say okay, then where is it?
But
I don't.
that's the thing. You seem to be wanting to find explicit in the text these doctrines and ideas, when in fact what happens is you see the raw materials for those in the text that show themselves in the principles of the founding, such as all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights,
But they're
life,
not. Okay,
liberty.
but they're not created equal. Like the
They
Israelites, the
are.
Moabites were not
The,
created
the,
equal. If
just
you're born a
because what you
Moabite,
see as uh, a perceived inequality before the law is not a
from God.
commentary on the value
No.
of the human
It's not.
individuals.
It's not a perceived inequality before the law. This is an actual inequality mandated by God. God gave them
Okay.
this rule. He told them the Ammonites and the Moabites, you can't come in here.
Hmm.
So we're not talking about perceived, actual
But
from God.
just like for example, the prohibition from women in the pastorate or in the office of elder, um, that that is a perceived inequality, but it's not a representation that men and women are somehow unequal. Similarly, the way that the temple, the place of worship was set up, will have some
How is that
segregations
not an
in it,
act?
is
How is
a
that not an
perceived inequality, but that's not a commentary on the value of the individuals involved.
Okay, so question. So, all right, so if it said that black people um, can be pastors, but white people can't, would that just be a perceived inequality or actual inequality?
Um, that's a hypothetical that doesn't exist in Christianity
No. I mean,
because
it's functionally equivalent. I'm just asking. So we're saying so in the Bible we see that here men can hold a position that women can't, and you
mhm,
saying that's not an inequality. So I'm saying
yeah,
if white people could hold it but black people couldn't, would that be just a perceived inequality or an actual inequality?
I, I would say in these terms it would be a perceived inequality because we're not talking about um, the, this reminds me of our conversation on freedom with libertarianism.
Hmm.
An understanding of freedom um, will, but depending on your understanding of freedom, it will change how you view this, right? And so I think you're coming from this more libertine view of freedom, that liberty means I can do whatever I want. I have access to all of the options available.
Well, we're not
When
talking about liberty. We're just talking
no,
about equality.
I understand,
Okay.
but a restriction of that perceived liberty is then viewed as a structural inequality. So if I don't have this option, if I have this door closed to me, then somehow I'm less than because somebody else gets this ability or gets this potential that I don't.
Well,
I,
so
does that make sense? At least the way I framed it.
that's not my position. Because my issue is not that there's liberty being restricted.
Okay.
It's that it's been restricted just for certain people, and it's not based on what they've done. It's based on who they are. Because if it was
Right.
based on what they've done, that is equality across the board.
Okay.
But that's not the way it's working. It's because I
But you're
was born
seeing this
looking like
restriction
this.
of liberty as an inequality. But
It's
because,
a,
for example, if the Moabites were permitted into the Holy of Holies, would would, would there be any restriction of liberty there?
so if a Moabite was to convert to Judaism and then be allowed in, cool. Like so, I will be okay with hey. The rule is you have to be following Judaism to come
Hmm.
in. That is cool. I understand that rule. That would be equality. The difference is you have an Egyptian and you have a Moabite.
Hmm.
Both of them convert to Judaism. The Moabite's not allowed in because he's a Moabite. That
Okay.
is inequality.
But it's an inequality that's stemming from what you would see as a limitation on liberty, right?
Well,
That they are prohibited from access in a way that somebody else isn't.
yes.
And so that's the
Because of
connection
who,
I was drawing. Is
because,
this
because of
this?
who they are, not because of what they've done. Because if it was because of what they done, it would not be inequality. Like
Yeah,
if both of us, neither one of us had access to, if I didn't have access to a room because of I committed a crime and you didn't,
mhm.
that's not inequality. If I can't get in because I'm black, well, that's inequality.
I could see that argument being made, except that what we're dealing with here is not black-white distinction. It's not any of the racial stuff that we deal with in a
Yeah,
modern
it's
context.
Moabite. It's
Yeah,
Moabite. But these two groups singled out, two ethnic groups.
hmm but and I would say that okay, number one, I'm glad we were able to at least agree in principle of the limitation on liberty leading to the perceived inequality.
Mhm.
Um, I would say that the restriction isn't based on who they are, but on the plans of God, on what God is working through the people of Israel. Um, and that will necessarily create boundaries, right? For example, Israel received the oracles of God. Nobody else did. There was no emissary sent to Sodom to bring the Ten Commandments there. There was no emissary sent to the Promised Land ahead of time for the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Amalekites, all the ites, right? And so one could look at that and go, well, that's not fair, right? That's an inequality. Well, it's not an inequality in that sense. It's just that's how he did it, and we can we can
But
argue over that,
I would
but
say
at
that
the end
that
of the
is
day, it doesn't matter, and that's not the type of distinction that the framers were looking at. They were looking at on the whole, right? In a Christian framework, from start to finish, you see the value and worth of human life, and through the gospel, you see there is no more barbarian and Scythian. There's no more Jew and Greek, right? We're
that's
all
for the
one in Christ.
gospel. That is for the
Right.
gospel. That is not the
It
way.
is.
That's not the way governments were treating individuals.
But when it
'Cause
comes
you could
to
say
the
that a
gospel going
Moabite,
out to the people, I mean, everybody is equal in that regard, right? Because
right,
all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
right.
There's not these specialized um, tribes of Israel that are going out meeting judgment on those who have committed any particular sin at this point. There is an equality of man out there, and part of that equality is we are all equally destitute in and of ourselves. We are selfish by nature. We are violent by nature, haters by
But
nature.
okay,
And
but the
and so
issue
that gets
is
into the separation of powers, right? Because the individual is going to be selfish, is going to look after me. And so by separating powers, you are able to disperse those evil desires.
I would say
And,
that's a
and,
good
and
reason to have the
yeah,
separation of powers. But you don't see that in the Bible.
again, I would argue you see the raw materials for it, right? The anthropology,
So the raw
and the
materials,
governmental abuses, right?
the,
You
I,
see that.
those
And then,
so the raw materials that you're pointing to, I see those as examples of what not to do.
uh, okay, well, if you don't value human equality, I mean, that's your thing to do.
No,
I
that's not.
can't.
So no, no. What? So
That's all I've been talking about.
no,
And
no,
if
no,
you
no.
look at
What?
that as an example of what not to do,
But that's not. That's
okay,
not. But we don't see equality here. We see the Moabites and the Ammonites are treated differently because of who they are. The Amalekites had to die because of who
hmm
they were. So
again, I
that is
would say you're distorting the justification for it, and that's influencing
you're saying.
your
So there were some
conclusion.
individuals that did something bad to some other individuals. Hundreds of years later,
hmm
after all the parties involved are dead, other people are being punished. So if any individual Amalekite who God told, who was told, who was commanded to be killed, they were killed not because of anything they did. They were killed because they were Amalekite.
Okay, and what I'm saying
That's an
is
example of
that
what not to do.
principle was not instantiated in the law, and it was not a principle that the founders brought forth
That's
because
what
it's not a principle.
the principle.
And you seem to be arguing that that's what they were looking at, and they were going, you know what, we don't want to do that, so let's do something different.
That's why I brought up with the Moabites and Ammonites, because that principle is instantiated in the law.
Except they're
Because
not
Israel
establishing a church. They're
this is
specifically not establishing a church. That's what the First Amendment was about. But they weren't establishing a church, so they're not going to set priority or set regulations on who sits where at the worship service.
okay.
And expecting that to have an influence.
But what we're talking about is
you
inequality.
talk about oil and water here.
Even it's not, because and it's not even just there. You can even look at the way slaves were treated. If you were a non-Hebrew slave, you was a slave permanently because you weren't Hebrew. That is again, that's inequality before the law.
I
That
mean,
has nothing to do with a church. This is about how individuals are being treated, and it's based on your ethnic group.
okay, I think you're making mountains out of molehills because you are intentionally. And granted, I appreciate the pushback, but when you look at what
cherry picking.
yeah,
Okay,
I mean, I can appreciate it. I mean,
but it's not.
that's
Okay,
why I like coming back. I enjoy this kind of conversation.
What example could I give that wouldn't be? What counter example could I give that wouldn't be cherry picking? Because if you're saying the overall message is A, and then I look and I see 9A, 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 and I just pick one, I say, hey, I don't see this here. Like, that's not cherry picking. That's
Okay.
me pointing out just massive contradiction.
Well, okay, so we were talking about natural right to life, right? God-given right to life, and you brought up the commands to exterminate the Amalekites, the Canaanites, and I point out that though that was not instituted in the law to go out and kill these people, that was a unique circumstance that God specifically told a specific group of people at a specific period of time to go and do the thing.
Okay, so
And you're using that as a way to undermine the principle that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, including life.
No.
And what I'm saying is you're using an example that's not the principle even in the context in which it was executed, and you're using that to say this is part of a trend that establishes a new principle. That's the type of thing I'm talking about. And I think that's why your position is off base, because you're not understanding what's happening in the context that is happening in. Plain and simple.
So if it was just that one, you might have a point, except there's several instances of like
right.
a dozen.
Can you give an example in the law that Israel had that established a mandate to exterminate a people group?
So in the law.
Yeah.
Okay. So
But because we're talking about the principles, we're talking about the prescriptive principles that were given to Israel.
Mhm.
Can you name any instance in the law that prescribed wholesale that people got to go?
Okay, so remember that the issue wasn't that it was execution here, they were killing.
But the principle we're talking about is the right to life.
The principle I was talking about was collective punishment.
I understand, but the
however,
principle I was talking about
the
was the
problem.
right to life, which is what I put in the post that you wanted to talk about.
But
And if you want to move the goalpost, that's fine.
I'm not moving the goalpost.
But you're not undermining
but
the argument that I was making.
But I wasn't moving the goalpost. But here's the other issue that you run into is that God gives a command. So like does the authority of God, does it change? Are some commands greater than others?
What does that question mean? I didn't quite understand it.
So you have a law, you have a Mosaic law that came from God, and you have specific commands that come from God.
Correct.
So it's all the law. It's from God.
I would disagree with that assessment. That's like saying God has established the laws of physics as part of creation, and anytime he acts in a miraculous way to undermine or counteract the laws of physics, that therefore changes the laws of physics.
No.
Exactly. So
Well,
God
that's
has
what I'm saying.
established a principle, has established a set of laws, and is free and well within his authority to say, hey, in this instance, I need you to do this. Go do that.
Okay. So
And that doesn't undermine the principle of the law.
it does undermine the principle because it happens so often.
Okay. And if that's the position you want to take, that's
But
fine. But recognize that's not the way the founders were approaching the biblical mandates.
okay.
That's not
So
how they were
all
approaching the text.
right,
That's not the
I
way
was okay.
most people
If you okay,
approach the text. And I mean,
I will concede that if you ignore large chunks of the Bible, then somehow maybe you could get this.
okay,
But, but
I'll accept your concession.
all right. But it's like past 8:30. I'm surprised my daughter didn't bust in here.
I know. I just noticed what time it was, and I was wondering why I didn't see her.
Yeah.
But maybe we can stop before she barges in.
Yeah, we do that. But anyway, man, I enjoyed the conversation. I want appreciate you for coming on, and I want have you back on soon. If I think of something else or you post something else, I'll be like, I disagree with that.
All right, I'll try to be more edgy in the memes and posts that I make.
Yeah, man. All right, man. Well, good to see you, man. Be good, brother.
Take care.
And guys, thanks for tuning in to Debatable. I will catch you all later. And I am stopping.